Recording is on.
Okay. All right, cool. So today we'll be talking about new subjectivities and old institutions, I guess is the title. But roughly continuing on the topic of alternative academic institutions and see what happens. We'll start with a community-guided 10 minutes mindfulness and then go into some presentation by Matthew and then some discussion. So we should be at a total of an hour and a half or so with some community announcements at the end. So Jen, Joff, anyone else is down to guide about 1 minute?
So
Matthew, you want to do? Yeah? Dave, you're down? Great.
Yes.
Beautiful. Matthew, you want to do some? Like a 1 minute guidance of meditation along with others in the moment?
Sure, I got my sound bowl, so I like the sound bowl.
Okay, cool. All right, let's do. So then let's say it's the five
Pavel,
of us.
I've put 2 minutes up. Shall I move it down to 1 minute on my timer?
No, it's 5 of us, so 2 is good. So let's do a running order so we know who goes when. So we just go kind of unprompted after each other. So maybe I'll start with about 1 minute, and then we can have just in the order on my screen, Dave, Jen, Joff, and Matthew close off. Does that sound good?
About 1 minute apiece, 2 minutes?
2 minutes or so.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, let's sit with our spine straight for a moment. Ground down. Take a deep breath in through the nose, moving attention from the bottom of the spine up to the top of the crown of the head. And exhale, feeling all the muscles in the body relax and hang on the skeleton. Take another deep breath in up the spine. And exhale, dropping a little bit deeper. And the third time, inhale. And exhale with a sigh this time, letting go of everything that came before today and before this moment. Fully landing in the seat, in this presence, in this relaxation. And just find something inside your body that feels maybe a little excited about this call. Just notice that excitement, or maybe not about this call, maybe about something else, but just find that in the body and be with that feeling of excitement for a moment. Savor it. Okay, Dave?
All right, so we'll move from that attention to the feeling back to the breath. In particular, just the feel of the breath as it moves in and out at the tip of the nose. Notice the details. How is it different on the inhale than the exhale? Do you perhaps pause for a moment at the top and the bottom? Keep your attention on those things, and if your mind wanders, just gently bring it back.
Okay. Keep breathing. Just know that your body will take care of everything. You're rooted in your body. It's safe. And you can start to take your attention away from the inside and stretch. Stretch to the entities that have met in this room together. Feel the presence of us as a group. Know the blood and the pumping of the blood that occurs in all of us. We might be on Zoom, but we are real beings. We are rooted on the surface of the planet, and yet we are meeting together. Just sense and feel into that reality. Feel the skin of our planet and the air that we share and the breath that we're sharing.
Job? You're muted. Jav, do you want to go next? You need to unmute though. Okay, maybe Matthew.
All right. Just continue breathing. Like Jen said, the body knows, and whatever kind of insights or new surprises that have come up so far, let's just lean into those a bit. Continue breathing for a sec. And I'd like to end here on what the last monastery I was at used to call a tremendous breath. So taking in these insights, these feelings that have grounded us so far, and just letting out a big sigh at the end.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like we could have gone a bit longer, yeah. Like that, but yeah, I don't know. I enjoy this sort of community meditations. Have been very nice, just as a low pressure to just say what comes up and have this like sort of spontaneous arising of group form meditation. So
Mm-hmm.
and to get to feel the different ways people approach practice. Yeah. Okay, so with that, let's transition to our topic for today. So, Matthew, do you want to present yourself a little bit and then kick it off?
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, I like that form too. By the way, just wanted to say is they've really done like a group meditation like that where people kind of pass it along, but it's nice. I think it works pretty well. And yeah, before I get started, let me just make sure I can share my screen. Okay. Let's see. Okay. Okay, can you guys see my screen?
Yep.
Okay. And okay. Yeah, so I'm Matthew, and I've been helping out with CSCSC a bit. And I think Dave, you're the only one I haven't really met, or this is like our first call together. But I think I'm, generally familiar with more or less everyone else here to various degrees. And yeah, I kind of wanted to. Part of the call, I guess, will be about sort of what Eric last time called structural misfitting. So I'll leave a little bit of the details of my background and my context, kind of like, yeah, what I'm interested in, or like researching, more so towards that part of the call. And yeah, I guess we'll just get right into it. Let's see. Yeah, and let me see. Just so we have a bit of a time frame, I think hopefully I'll kind of want to do it the same thing as last time too, where it's like anybody can feel free to jump in at any time. But there's a few moments where I'll kind of pause and see if anyone has anything to say. But probably I'm imagining like 35, 40 minutes, kind of roughly. But yeah, I wanted to start here with this picture because I was sort of tempted to just like have make like an AI slide deck for this thing, and I've done that a few times and it actually worked quite well. But I figured maybe I'll just go back to the the pre-AI production. And there was this thing that I used to do, which is just like use an image and then kind of use that to anchor the presentation throughout. And to be honest, like I was looking through my Pinterest and I thought this was just like a nice looking image, or like a cool looking image. It's called The Four Evangelists, painted by Cimabue. And yeah, at first I just thought it looked nice, and then kind of looking into it a little bit more, it kind of has an interesting background, and sort of like feeds into these themes that I hope to kind of or kind of build on a little bit today. So yeah, it was built or painted on the wall of a church in Assisi. Um, and the thing I kind of find interesting about it is that there are these four angels that they're at the boundary, and they're sort of serving as like protectors of a city. And I'm really kind of into this like boundary image, or boundary imagery. So in that sense, and maybe even like in a few other senses, I think it's a pretty appropriate image. And this is a little bit more of a kind of a context on the painting. And it kind of also fits into these, sort of, I guess, like the mood or the context that we're currently in, I think a lot, which is like sort of this transformational, even like apocalyptic biblical imagery a little bit. And it's funny because I don't really use Christian imagery at like much at all. And I'm actually not super familiar with kind of Christian practice and theory, apart from whatever I got growing up from it. But I think it fits pretty nicely. Anyways, a bit of an overview of the call is that I'm going to build some context, kind of, especially building on last call and sort of some other things that we've been talking about. And then kind of go into the frame that I want to suggest for today, or like going forward, which is institutions and subjectivity, kind of how these two things go together, and connected through this paper called A Hinterland for Doing Relevance, which I think kind of points to some of these things in a really nice way. And then kind of connect these things to, maybe the September workshop and sort of some other things going forward. And these, nobody has, just want to say first, so like nobody is required to know any of this. This is not required information. And the idea is, highlight some of these things in the beginning. But these are kind of some of the things that it'll be building off, or that I'm kind of working with. So the community call last month, some of the things that were raised. Another video that Pavel recently did on theory of mindfulness. This paper, Hinterland for Doing Relevance, and another paper from Andrew Pickering, which I really find to be, I guess hits a lot of things really nicely. And then just imagining new alternatives, and I think everyone kind of probably has an intuitive sense for that one. But none of these are required to know of beforehand, and I'll kind of go over them a bit. And sort of the main idea is to build on some of these things and to kind of, get the language going for these like really complex or broad themes, I guess, as it relates to kind of like institutional transformation, subjectivities, how these kind of connect, and maybe in a way that we can kind of think about it in our own epistemic living spaces. And epistemic living spaces, I'll make that clear kind of at the end, but it's kind of like the place in which our research or our knowledge kind of lives. And I particularly like that metaphor because it emphasizes like this liveliness to it, and the spaces that are involved. I think it is kind of nice and interesting. Another thing that Jen had said in the meditation, that like we're all kind of in different parts of the world, and also in different time zones. But it's nice that we kind of, there are these digital epistemic living spaces which are kind of emerging and really meaningful, and kind of have their own texture in a way. I guess one more thing, I sort of just put this quote in here because I feel like everyone has probably like heard it before, and it's sort of like the general theme that's being worked with today. This quote from E.O. Wilson: "We have pathological or Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions and godlike technology. And it's kind of, more or less what's being explored here. First, a bit of a summary of some of the things that have been kind of talked about, etc. In last month's call, Eric had started with this kind of theme or, I guess, situation of structural misfitting, which I thought was really apt. It kind of fits my own situation as well quite a bit. It's kind of like you don't really fit into one particular spot or discipline or area, but you're sort of interested in a lot of these interconnections more generally. Is it academia? Is it contemplative life? Is it, working on a farm? And just doing your own thing, sort of. So it's sort of a nice term, I think, to kind of frame a lot of our, or at least, it resonated with myself. And the subjectivity related to that. Another big thing in the call was kind of like, this AI disruption, I guess, with what was kind of outlined as maybe like a feudal academic system. And it's obviously like a bit of a simplification. But kind of like, AI is really changing sort of, or has the potential to kind of change these existing structures or practices and relationships. I guess it remains to be seen how it's going to happen, but it's kind of, one thing that Eric had said was like, it's not a question whether if you're using it, it's sort of like everybody's using it. Everybody has a tab open, and it's kind of how much you're using it. And then we also talked a bit about peer review and academic writing as it relates to these things, kind of a lot of a rise in a lot of publications and the way peer review is kind of being affected by this. And I think another important thing that was also talked about was kind of, mentorship and supervision within PhD programs and early career researchers, kind of that human element as well, like being an early career researcher and the kind of development trajectories that are sort of related to that. And that's sort of what I want to talk about today a little bit. Some other things that this kind of naturally brings on the table, the structure and role of the university, sort of like the purpose of science as well, whether that's kind of shifting a bit. And another thing that we kind of ended on, which I liked, was like just this feeling of like, joy of doing science well or doing research well, or like good knowledge production. And that's another theme that I kind of want to build on today. And another way to kind of interpret this or look at this, or at least the way that I kind of looked at it, is that it's really kind of like a time of ruptures. Ruptures that both, and by ruptures, I kind of just mean like a pretty big deviation from the norm. And there's ruptures that are constraining, and there are ruptures that are enabling in, in different ways, of course. But they kind of feed back into each other. And so, for example, some ruptures that are constraining, just like, the pressure of a lot more deadlines, this, I guess, publish, perish sort of culture. Lots of other crises that are happening, meaning crisis, kind of purpose crisis that a lot of people face. And these are kind of pressures of the old system not being able to like accommodate a lot of these new things, I think, more or less. And of course, that's just one interpretation. And at the same time, you kind of have a lot of enabling ruptures where like AI can do so many new things. There are these new organizations coming up, these new groups. So you kind of have these enabling and constraining ruptures at the same time, which are kind of suggesting at some kind of, or hinting at some kind of like transformation or structural or emergence or kind of some change potentially. And this is just one way to kind of work with that, I guess, is that, these two kinds of ruptures are happening. I think the thing we were sort of going over last call is like, we're sort of interested in doing things a little differently, whatever that might look like. And that's sort of, I guess, maybe in a way, the topic of today's talk. But more or less, it's kind of, this maybe transformation or change within these ruptures. And I just wanted to pause there to see if anybody had any comments or anything else they wanted to add about last talk, or any other kind of context that might be interesting here. And I use this image because it sort of is a bit like a deluge. I sort of think that there's so much stuff happening, and it's kind of difficult to process all of it. So I'm curious. I just wanted to pause really quick if anyone wanted to add anything there.
Yeah, I love this idea of a storm. I think we all kind of feel that. I was just saying to my daughters this morning, we're just in such big stories. It's like the big bad story and the big good story are both kind of happening at the same time. And I really like this kind of enabling, constraining thing. But there's something that I might say about that kind of loop. I think there's something else happening, maybe a third thing, and that is the collapse that gives space for something new. And I think we often see collapse as a negative thing, but actually sometimes it's just, I work on the small holding here for us, things dying and composting is like a really important part of the life cycle. And I think that we get that socially as well and politically. So I think the collapse is might be a bit uncomfortable, but I think it's quite an important part of a cycle.
Yeah, maybe on that note, crises are not constraining. And the quote that comes to mind is, "Don't let a good crisis go to waste."
Yeah.
Opportunistic quote that, like, I often see. There's room to really act within them. So yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, do you want me to track time for you in some way? Like tell you when there's...
I have a clock right next to me, so I think it's
Okay.
Thank you.
Cool. Okay.
I can't see the screen, so if anyone else has to say something, I'll just jump in and go for it. Okay. That's I really love both of those framings, especially that last quote. Don't waste a good crisis, or don't let a good crisis go to waste. And that's sort of, and this also kind of points to a little bit with Jen's comment as well. It's like the framings that we use for this kind of storm or whatever, this deluge. It's kind of and this kind of brings me to my next point, or something. It's kind of like a bit of a meta point, I guess, but it's a bit like whatever kind of framing we're using, it's always kind of leaving a little bit of something out potentially. Even this like ruptures of constraining and enabling, it's one way to look at the situation, but it's always going to be like more complex than whatever language we're really using. And so like the crisis thing is very similar, and like a good framing as well. And collapse, there are a lot of different ways to kind of like frame it or use language to make sense of and sort of build off of what's happening. And I kind of make this meta point, or I think it's interesting or important to make, especially in light of, or kind of like building off what Andrew Pickering said in that paper that I had mentioned, where he says that we're kind of in a shift, or he's, I guess, arguing for or calling for a shift for more from a representational idiom, where, just quick definition here, where science's defining feature is its production of representations. And language is kind of used in that way to a more performative idiom, where it's kind of, we're using language to interact and co-constitute reality. And I think that's just one of the, maybe shifts or things that are happening, which I think is really interesting and important to reflect on. That, yeah, and this kind of came up last talk too, that like no one perspective or like language or word or concept is ever really going to kind of fully grasp or point to what's happening. But instead using language in kind of this more productive sense. And I think images really can be an interesting and meaningful part of that as well. That's sort of what I want to allude to today a bit. But yeah, I think this is exactly right. That it's kind of, I think Pickering hits the nail on the head. I guess that it's kind of using, the shift towards using language in a more performative way. And building off of that, sort of the perspective or the incomplete perspective or kind of language that I want to use today is institutions, or language from institutional theory, and some of their concepts, and subjectivity, and kind of how the two relate together, and sort of comes to head in this in what's called the paradox of embedded agency in institutional theory. So that's sort of like, what to expect going forward, I think. So yeah, institutions and subjectivity. I guess starting with subjectivity first kind of makes more sense, and sort of going with this performative idiom, not trying to get like a definition, like this is what subjectivity is, or it's definitely this person has it right. But I think there's a few things that could definitely be said about it, which kind of make sense and sort of point to a useful concept, which is pretty much just like our experience and self-understanding of being a part of the world, more or less. And it's the aim isn't to get the exact definition, but a few other things that I think are important to consider is that it's always fundamentally relational and kind of embedded in context, embedded in history, in the communities that we're a part of, the families, the social networks we're a part of. And I think IFS kind of points to this pretty well, that we're kind of this, I really like the term aperspectival, like this family of different perspectives, I guess, and sort of thinking of subjectivity in that way. And in that respect, it's very tied to one's identity and sense of self.
IFS as in internal family systems?
Yes. Maybe, I'm actually not like too familiar with IFS or like a practitioner or anything, but I know it's kind of one of these frameworks that have been kind of in the loop recently. Maybe that's a paper I can also, or getting a paper on that I can also share about after the call. But it kind of points to these, like, we're composed of different parts. Like, we're not really necessarily one thing. In some sense, we totally are, but it's kind of, you have your part as an academic, you have your part as a neighbor, as a citizen, as all these different things. And I guess the aim to some degree is kind of going to be about our part as an academic or as a researcher. So in that respect, academic subjectivity, kind of just subjectivity in relation to academic life and our sense of purpose, sense of identity, motivations for doing research, our feelings related to it, how we work and relate to others, and kind of, potentially maybe the pressures that some of us might feel, and the overall kind of incentives that are involved in these things within and beyond academia. And to kind of fit that with somewhat of a broad definition of institutions as well. Excuse me. I really like Giddens' definition, where he just says they're the more robust parts of social life. And there's kind of this funny situation, I feel like, where like if you're filling out a grant, they say like what's your institution? Or like what institution are you a part of? And if you answered that question honestly, it would take up like 100 lines or something. Which is to say that we kind of have this view of an institution as one, maybe like, I'm a part of VUB or something, or I'm a part of a college, I'm a part of that institution. But more broadly, it's kind of just the general rules of the game within the milieus, within the context that we're a part of. And it kind of has a very vague definition, in my opinion, in institutional theory, which is kind of why I like this definition from Giddens. It's just the more robust parts of social life, which kind of works in a broad sense. But one way, and that includes the material and immaterial aspects, and one way to kind of refine it a little bit, at least one that makes sense to me, is this definition or this kind of splitting it up, from the sociologist Scott, where he says you have the regulative dimensions, which are like the rules and the laws and kind of the more powerful mechanisms of institutions. You have a normative pillar, which is like a sense of what is good. What does it mean? Yeah, what's kind of valued? What are some of the ideals? And then a kind of cognitive pillar, which is like the overall worldviews and frameworks. And yeah, I'll actually just jump to the example of quote unquote science as a quote unquote institution to kind of maybe illustrate this a bit, or explain it a little more. Where the regulative dimensions are kind of maybe like the time cycles and the grants and the academic positions, the rules that we kind of have to operate in a more like strict sense. You have to fill out the grant in this kind of way in order to get this money so that you have this amount of time to do the research, or kind of like tenure positions and things related to this. Normative kind of points to the ideals of, quote unquote academic excellence and what that means. And so you probably already noticed that regulative and normative are not totally separate, but they kind of share a lot of similarities. And yeah, kind of what it means to do good scientist, to be a good scientist. So it kind of has more of this cultural aspect to it. The cognitive is more so the underlying worldview of science, kind of. And one concept, I guess, related to this worldview that it has increasingly come up in my my own, I guess, knowledge adventures, is the bifurcation of nature, which is kind of science, as a quote unquote academic institution, has this underlying worldview of the bifurcation of nature, which pretty much just means we see the natural world as something kind of separate from us. And the aim kind of in this respect, one of the aims of science is to kind of get an objective view of this world. So yeah, academic institutions in this respect are kind of, just referring it to as the regulative, normative, and cognitive dimensions. Related to kind of, science or knowledge production. So yeah, the cultures and mechanisms of knowledge production more broadly. And the paradox of embedded agency is kind of this funny question, which I've also heard it referred to as the Moses problem elsewhere. It's pretty similar, but it's kind of like, how does institutional change happen when agents and their subjectivities are shaped by existing institutional constraints? and subjectivities. So it's like, as somebody that's a part of a system, how can that transformation happen to make, new practices or values, etc., when you're kind of shaped by that existing system? And that's more or less like the invitation that I want to open up today. And I think an important thing here is, like, the way that I see it personally, is that it has a lot to do with this cognitive dimension of seeing the world, or seeing the kind of purpose of science or academic research a bit differently, and kind of questioning some of these underlying worldviews. I think this is also where mindfulness kind of has an interesting role, because practicing mindfulness, of course, it's always different for everyone, but it kind of allows for this aperspectival nature to emerge, where you kind of become more reflexive and, I guess, more expansive, or try and be more aware of your own motivations, your own feelings, your own sense, your own context, and yeah, find some truth in it, and not be kind of caged in by that. I guess ego, for lack of a better word here, and of course, yeah, common sense is a better word, I think. What you take to be like fundamentally obvious, I guess. Mindfulness is a good way to kind of demystify this common sense. Yeah, and I think in relation to this and to sort of academic institutions, I like this Kierkegaard quote a lot, which is, the world is not a problem to be solved, but a reality to be experienced. I think that kind of points to one of the ways that mindfulness can kind of provide, through its practices and through its, yeah, I guess, integration, more of this, yeah, recovering from the bifurcation of nature, I guess, or more of this kind of aperspectival kind of view. Yeah, and it's kind of, just to point out really quick, also kind of important to point out that mindfulness has its own, or has been experiencing its own paradox of embedded agency, where I guess one way to put it, I had just recently come across this framing, but assimilation and accommodation, from Piaget. Assimilation basically just means something gets brought into an existing model, and then accommodation is kind of more so about building new models, or really changing your view of things. And mindfulness is, and naturally and fair enough, kind of assimilated into the, I guess, modern ontology, I guess. I'm trying to find the right word there, but like the academic worldview, the scientific worldview, that's kind of founded on the bifurcation of nature. So you have, as Pablo had mentioned in that recent talk, you kind of have these mindfulness studies, which are like, okay, after studying or after meditating for 10 minutes, like, these people are more productive. They're better, they're better like workers, even. One could take it that far, but it's kind of embedded in these values of like productivity, but it kind of fits into the existing worldview, or schema that doesn't quite get the full picture of what mindfulness can be. Or kind of, yeah, it assimilates, opposed to, and naturally enough, it assimilates. Yeah. And yeah, I guess I'll also just pause really quick if anyone has anything to say, because I feel like I was talking quite a bit. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like there were a lot of, well, like a number of points where I wanted to bring things up. So, but maybe I know I'm forgetting. But something about, I like this point of, where does novelty come from? If where do institutional change come from? If we are all institutionalized, right? It seems very parallel to this search for enlightenment, and right, like how can I get beyond or outside of the self if I am just using the self to do that, right? If I'm like, my mind is coming up with like, oh, that's a good teacher, I should follow him. That's a good practice, I should, right? So it's still coming from the mind. How can I that? And so it's requiring, or what like spiritual progress requires, a surrender, an opening to something beyond, that I myself maybe do not fully agree or approve of because I don't understand it or something, right? So that's why like an external agency, surrender to an external agency. And in the ultimate sense, right, it's surrender to the external agency of the divine, which just today here we had a conversation and a presentation of about mystical experiences. And so ultimately, like the way that this is someone at the Harvard Divinity School who's studying this, and the way she kind of defines it is it's a personal, unspeakable sort of experience of meeting the divine. And when that happens, it is completely counter-institutional, right? And so institutions often feel threatened by them and sort of suppress mystics, or institutions are founded by mystics who have had that experience, and then they source and create new institutions, but then the institution gets solidified. And so to me, there seems to be a really core tension between mystical experience, which is completely subjective, and completely kind of not informed by the institutional values, but really coming from the, somehow from something else, right? In a way that's kind of jarring maybe to the normal institutionalized perspective. And then the tension between these mystical experiences, or people who have had those and who are guided by those, and this consensus reality that we live in, which is this solidified, as you were saying, like more robust parts of social life that don't want this external, right, thing. So it really seems like a fundamental and like very, I don't know, natural in a way tension.
Yeah, I think so too, totally. And I'm not sure there is. I think it's a paradox, or as you call it, a tension. I don't think it's something that is should or can be solved. It's like it's. I mean, we've just looked through history. The mystic arises, and then the accretion starts to happen around their personality and their being, and the people who follow, they become followers, and then it all kind of solidifies into some kind of dogma, some kind of institution. But it's funny. We use this term institution, but in the UK, in the British thing, quite often an institution referred to a madhouse. And you say, what institution are you? It's like, well, I actually belong to the Harvard madhouse, but I used to go to MIT, and there's this kind of, it's of course they're not madhouses, but there is something,
tongue in cheek.
Giddens he calls it robust, but I think there's a rigidity that can be unhealthy. And I say, if you're in an institution, you are not an institution unless you've really, really lost it, because we're all human beings. We're all situated in place. You go home, you've got all the being that you are. So an institution is just somewhere you kind of go. But the other thing I was thinking about, I remember watching this movie where this woman had, I don't know, 20 different personalities she'd had some deep trauma, and the psychologist was trying to get these parts of herself reintegrated. And I think we're like that, and we don't know it. I think we are disassociated in a way. So you get somebody who's part of a corporate body or an institution, and they may be doing things that are actually against their personal sense of right and wrong, or having somebody I know, unfortunately, got themselves in the Epstein files, and I don't think they did anything awful, but they were at some of the parties where bad stuff happened later on. And I think that's kind of how we work. So we end up inadvertently in bad stuff without intending to be. So I think it's super complex, but there is this need to try, and personally, I think we need to integrate the real human being situated with families and skin in the game, and,
Mhm.
and don't allow our institutional selves to kind of run away
Mhm.
with us and kind of reroute ourselves. Well, that's my thinking anyway.
Yeah, I agree with those sentiments. I mean, there's the thing about institutions is that they are the bodies in our society, all of us, that are entrusted with resources, and so
Mhm.
in some sense, we none of us have any choice. I mean, we can more or less make our way outside of institutions, but there will almost always be some. Even I have my own thing going on, and I'm working for myself in a sense. Where my client's going to be? Well, they're probably going to be some institutions, right? It's pretty rare, lucky when you're able to get beyond that, especially as a scientist. And
Mhm.
so, what people have said, what both Jan and Pavel have said about the not losing yourself. I mean, the institution will try to make you melt with it, right?
Mhm.
It
Mhm.
will, ask you to meditate and become one with it, the institution, right?
Mhm.
So, if you can keep a practice is a great way to keep your identity alive, and in that sense, to become a change agent, to have the courage, I guess, or just the wherewithal to make a change, even within the structure that you have to be a part of in order
Mhm.
to butter your bread.
Yeah, that, Matthew, I don't think you may find the institution may not be capable of change beyond a certain parameter,
Mhm.
because science is what it is. There is ways of doing good science, and that can't be changed.
Mm.
There are ways of doing research that are not scientific but are perfectly valid, and I don't think they work in institutions. So I think we almost need to be doing these. We need to kind of be spinning some different plates at the same time.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. No, those are all great points. And did anyone else have anything to say before I go on? Okay. Kind of like the the image that I think maybe kind of illustrates this, or I like what was said, that like you don't really have a choice except to be a part of them to some degree. And it's also the thing about kind of these ourselves being shaped by these institutions, because yeah, you kind of have to like, you can't really like, you can try and step out of them, but you can't ever fully step out of them. um, and it's sort of this tension that I feel like, yeah, uh, a lot of us are maybe in. And yeah, like what was just said, like creating new stuff, or new things, or new trajectories. And this is sort of, for people that are familiar with this image, it's kind of, you probably noticed it already, but it sort of looks like a duck, and it sort of looks like a bunny, depending on how you look at it. And I think this can maybe illustrate a bit some of the things that were just mentioned. So in this particular context, it's pretty clear. And sort of with the idea here as well, that it's like the institution is a bit of the background to some degree, kind of like the background context. Again, probably you have a sense for which one that is. And this one, maybe not as clear. um, but I think this particular image, yeah, gets to what was just being said about kind of this feeling or sense of needing or wanting to participate in other institutions or create new things, but kind of being also at the same time in these, necessarily having to work with and through these kind of older institutions a bit. And so kind of reflecting on this tension, whether it's, yeah, like you were saying, Jan, like spinning plates, or all these different kind of dimensions that are involved with it. I think it was pretty funny. This yeah, seeing institution like in that way that you had mentioned, like it's sort of like the madhouse sort of thing, because institutions really shape subjectivity, is sort of, I guess, an emerging theme. And it's like, how might there be institutions which shape and encourage subjectivity in a way that is, quote unquote, mindful, and or in a way that's kind of we think is honest or good, instead of kind of that feeling that was, yeah, because I think I get it a lot, and I think other people probably do, where it's like you're a part of these things and you kind of have to be, but you're almost just like just trudging through it in a way, and there's a sense of like bad faith almost, potentially. Of course, everybody's different, but yeah, I think this particular image is interesting, and it kind of fits to this structural misfitting, I think, that Eric had brought up last call, where it's like it sort of looks like it could be a bunny or it could be a duck, but it's really the sense that like you probably see a bunny, but it's like a bunny in water. So in that respect, it's like we sort of feel like we need new institutions, but we're also not within kind of the background context or the conditions to kind of make that happen. So yeah, the thing that kind of, I guess, going back to the introduction a bit, is like that I'm kind of interested in, or sort of like my background is just kind of reimagining these institutions and these kind of cultivating these new institutions. And in that respect, I remember one of my advisors had said like, and like academia is like, you just have to play the game. Like, you need to know the rules. You have to play the game. And funny enough, that's another I guess definition that's sometimes used for institutions, just rules of the game. And I think a lot of people are just like, I don't want to play by these rules. Like I would rather have other rules to play by. And that's sort of what I think this image kind of captures. And yeah, in this respect, I think an important thing here too is a sense of like vocational ambiguity, in the sense that like in being a structural misfit, it's like, yeah, where do I fit in? Like, what could my vocation really be? And I'm sort of using this language partly because I've been reading this book, Novelist as a Vocation by Murakami, and it's really nice and kind of illuminating in this, I guess, sort of space that I'm in, where I'm not really sure what I want to do, or like where I want to, place my energy, or things like that. But like at the same time, I kind of want a vocation, or like something to do that with. So yeah, kind of what are the new researchers? What are the new scientists or artists? What are these? And I'm using vocation instead of career path, because I think career path is kind of like a bit neoliberal sounding, or you're doing it to make money, sort of. And that's not always the case, of course. But it's kind of, I think vocational kind of gets to these deeper questions of like why, and sort of like what's the purpose behind this, a little more. Let me see. Yeah, and I think there's a lot of possibilities in terms of what might happen. But some of the questions that I think are interesting to kind of reflect on in this sense is like, yeah, how to have this sense of collaborative and creative freedom. And going back to this like joy and purpose in science that was mentioned last call, there's this word, this German word, which I think captures it pretty nicely. And I don't speak German. I hope I'm not butchering this, but it's Kunstgenuss, and that pretty much means like enjoyment and appreciation of art for the sake of it, kind of. And that could also mean, looking at a really nice study or research paper, and kind of having a sense of a sense of enjoyment when someone does it really nice or someone does it really well, and kind of also applying this to our own research or our own knowledge production or artistic creation, kind of like driven by a sense of doing it for the sake of enjoyment and for the sake of doing it well to some degree. And kind of, some other questions related to this are like, what are maybe some of the new rituals or some of the new ceremonies or like ways that we can become more embedded in place in this respect? And where can we have our sense of, I think this image kind of nicely, maybe idyllically illustrates this, but like, where can we have some lands to like, to run with the metaphor a bit, like to hop on instead of being bunnies in water. So I'll pause there again, really briefly, to see if anybody has any comments.
This makes me think of Sertalange's The Intellectual Life from the 20s. And it was kind of this French Dominican who wrote a book very structured about how to build a life coherent in pursuing truth.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a big space for knowledge celebration, knowledge dissemination, not just the work of pursuing it and finding it, but then relishing in it, celebrating it, sharing with other people. And it makes it just how difficult that the resistance sometimes people have, the guilt, the fear they have to pause and enjoy their work. Makes me think a lot of the kind of maybe the influence of consumer culture, bottling up products that are consumed. Like, I don't play an instrument, I just listen to the music. I don't put on a show or something. I go to a movie and I kind of constantly consume it. And so maybe I don't have that much artistic capacity, or I'm not used to expressing that.
Mm-hmm.
And also the kind of over specialization where people are in their lane and they're contributing to something and they're part of a conversation and they feel they have a place and a contribution to make. But then they look around and there's like no one there to celebrate it with, no audience, no one who understands what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
and a kind of lack of a coherent community that can actually follow the details.
Mm-hmm.
Where you in the past you would go into spaces of worship and there would be familiar symbols and signs that would be drawn from the natural world. Like in a lot of these medieval frescoes and stuff, there's actually lots of science and astronomy interwoven in a sense of a shared space that we all inhabit.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of feel that like with the wave of technology, I definitely feel, coming back from some conferences, how much people are talking about using large language models and language AIs, and it's changing their workflows, and the ground is literally like shifting beneath your feet. But at the same time, it's almost like furthering a divide where some people are doubling down and they're like, I'm not using any of that. That's totally anathema to me. And then they're not actually like brought in and integrated.
Mm-hmm. I think one thing that I really stuck out there, a coherent community that can follow the details. And that's, kind of on this theme of like knowledge ecologies, which more or less kind of just thinking about how, knowledge is kind of, followed together, created together, shared together, lived together, in service of, place-based, I guess, I don't really like the word solutions, but yeah, place-based solutions and place-based being. Yeah, I think
And
that's
maybe we can wrap up in
yeah.
about 5 minutes just to have a little time for
Mhm.
closing announcements.
Yeah, great point. It went a bit. I can send this in the over email, I think, but pretty much this paper just kind of outlines some practices that are helpful for these reflective processes. So I won't go over it too much, but I'll kind of skip to the end here. Here's a quick diagram of what it sort of looks like, but sort of relating, revaluing, situating, and synthesizing are these four practices that these researchers outline. And this is kind of the image of a hinterland, sort of nice here because it provides that like lands or that like ecological sense of rootedness or place, which I think is a nice metaphor. And sort of thinking about how this might be worked with a little bit. One particular way, one of the practices that they mention on synthesizing, they notice or they argue for the importance of like bringing together different kinds of knowledge and synthesizing the information so that there can kind of be more a clearer sense of direction, clearer sense of purpose, a clearer sense of like what's needed even. And I think one of the things they also do is criticize like information synthesis tends to happen mostly just in reports. And I think one of the interesting things about this research community, it's like we're kind of invited to synthesize these things in a way that a report won't cut it. Like these different ways of knowing and being, and kind of thinking about this potential synthesis, I think is one potential way to build on their paper. And another thing that I just will highlight really quick is that they kind of write the whole paper in the sense of like, I'm sure maybe not everyone is familiar with this, but the sense of like if you're filling out a grant, for example, like showing how your knowledge is relevant, or like how is this relevant? And they kind of outline this in the sense of reflecting so that we can figure out what's relevant in order to solve problems. So there's kind of this implicit view that science is about solving problems. I think one of the tensions or paradoxes within this group is kind of going back to that Kierkegaard quote. It's like seeing the world not just as a problem to be solved, but a reality to be experienced. And kind of how science or knowledge production ecologies or mechanisms can integrate that worldview a little bit more, or how that might look. And I guess to wrap up here on a final point, I think this epistemic living spaces is a nice concept that kind of touches on these things. Defined as the lived and perceived arena in which scientists know and live their research lives. And I didn't cite it here, but this is from Ulrich Felt, and she kind of has a lot of good research in this area. And whenever we post this video, I'll also put these papers there. But it kind of emphasizes this living sense of knowledge production, of kind of being in community, of relating to place, and where our knowledge lives and how it lives. So thinking about what are epistemic living spaces and how do we serve them and how do they serve us, kind of going forward. And I think this is, as a potential invitation for the kind of upcoming workshops and conferences. Having a sense of like honesty or responsibility, I guess, to kind of contrast it with the bad faith sort of view. And thinking about like work and vocation, like what kind of work is really truly meaningful and I guess and relevant as it relates to kind of science and knowledge production at this time. And along with Kunstgenuss, again, I hope I'm not butchering that. I think another kind of German word that kind of can be applied here and be a really nice kind of framing. This other one, Kunstwollen, which means more or less that like each sort of era has their own artistic form or will or kind of shape in which they produce art, kind of like a style in a way. And I think it's kind of thinking about this framing in terms of science and in terms of knowledge production more generally, I guess. What is kind of this emerging Kunstwollen of like the artistic will that's for producing knowledge at this time. So yeah, I'll leave it at that. Yeah, and I'll stop.